everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. My name is Wendy O'Connell, and today on our show we have Tom Bodett. Tom is known far and wide for his voice, his storytelling, and his humor. From NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me to the Moth Hour, and to the voice, the spokesperson of Motel 6. However, meanwhile, back home, here in town, Tom is best known and liked for the many ways he breathes life into this community, by the easy way he connects people, and his ongoing enthusiasm to create new and always fun ways for us to support, to be part of, and to give back to our community. Welcome, Tom.
Well, it's great to be here finally, Wendy.
Yes, it's great to have you on. We're so glad you're on our airwaves.
Yes.
In this community.
Yeah, I can't believe it's taken us so long to get around to it.
Well, that's what happens. You're still, one of the first 100.
Oh, well, good. Excellent, excellent. So many years from now, it's just like, oh, the early years of Wendy. Yeah,
right, that's right. So, Tom, you're a Midwest guy. You were born in the Midwest and you grew up there?
I did. I was actually born in Illinois, raised in Wisconsin and Michigan. We moved to Michigan when I was in the second grade, and I graduated high school there and left as soon after that as I could. Michigan was a great place to be from, and I've heard that a lot, and that's very true. I wanted to be out west. That's where somehow I got the West in my mind early. I saw it in person when I was 13. My parents took us out for a quick trip around some of the western highlights, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, San Francisco in 1967. That might be what really did it. There was the Wild West, and I never stopped thinking about it. And it was like as soon as the opportunity presented itself, I was gone.
Yeah. To go back a second, you were one of many siblings. Is that right?
Second of six.
Second of six.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes, we were a good Catholic. Well, we were a Catholic family. I don't know how good of Catholic we were. I went to church more before I was 16 than any three people I know have gone in their entire lives. So every single morning we had to start the day with Mass. And then Saturdays there was the confession. I was also an altar boy, so there was weddings and there were funerals. And then, of course, Sunday we had to go in holy days. And so there was a lot of church. So I stopped going just because I didn't want to overdo a good thing. And I'm sure the big guy, if he's up there, would probably understand.
Yeah.
We had a good relationship for a while when I was younger. Yeah.
Well, you put your time in.
Yeah, right.
You really put in your time.
Yeah, we know. We got it.
Yeah.
Right.
So you go out west and you end up in Alaska, which is really west.
Yes.
Yeah.
The West was exactly what I thought it would be. It was fun, it was wild, it was beautiful. There were crazy people there. And the further west and the further north I went, the more intense all of that became. So I did not stop until I got to Homer, Alaska, which was the end of the road. It is literally the westernmost point of highway in North America.
Wow.
So you've got to stop.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been from sea to shining sea.
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of. I mean, even though Vermont's landlocked.
I've always been either a laborer as a young worker, then I became a carpenter through trial and error. I've always worked with my hands, and I never considered it odd because in Alaska it was like, everybody did. Everybody did for themselves. It was a very self-reliant kind of place. So I was nothing unusual. And after I was able to put aside building and I was making my money writing and with radio, I kind of put the tools aside for a few years and wasn't, again, really aware of missing them until I stopped drinking. About maybe 4 or 5 years into my entertainment career, my marriage was falling apart. I realized that my drinking had something to do with it. I also realized that probably one of the few controls I had over how much I drank was my wife, who was leaving. And so now what was I going to do? And so I stopped drinking. And And somehow in that first year of sobriety, again, unconsciously, I didn't plan it. I started picking up my tools again, and I started buying a few things to put out in the garage and working and starting to fool around with making furniture and some of the stuff that I'd never really done before because a carpenter, not a real woodworker.
Yeah.
Nobody would pay for fine woodworking. They still don't very often. And I fell in love with it, and it became my passion.
Yes.
And I realize now, as we all know now about addiction, is that you can't just stop whatever it is you're doing. You have to replace it with something. That once you get all those dopamine receptors all fired up and hungry, they don't go away just because you stop feeding them booze or whatever it is. They stay hungry, and so you got to find something that satisfies that. And for me, it just happened that it was working in my wood shop.
It really worked. That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's really impressive that you didn't go to nicotine, or you didn't go to a lot of gum chewing or something
and
like that.
it wasn't forced. It was like I would lay in bed and obsess about what I was going to make or how I was going to make it.
So those wheels were turning.
It was always there. It became, as so many, people in recovery are intense people.
Yes.
And that's why. And if you find something healthy that will occupy you like that, you are one of the lucky ones.
Yes.
And I am one of the lucky ones.
Yeah. During this time, too, you've got a career trajectory going on, right?
Yes.
Still in Alaska.
Yes.
Yeah. And how was that? How was that balance?
Well, it was very odd because I had like 10 years as just the builder guy. I had a small construction company. We put up 3-4 houses a year, a couple small commercial projects. No big deal, but it was a living for me and the few guys who worked for me. And then, like almost literally overnight, within an 18-month span of time, I was a national radio personality with a published book and then a deal for another one and an advertising contract, which I'm still doing 32 years later.
Wow. Yeah.
All of that happened very quickly. I just was what they were looking for on the day they were looking for it, I guess.
So, Tom, All Things Considered was kind of one of your first gigs.
It was.
Yeah.
What a gig, too. Because in Alaska, especially at that time, there was no other broadcasting. It was when they opened the pipeline in '77 and started spraying money on everybody. Everybody got public radio station. It was like 16 public radio stations built within a year or two. In fact, I built one of them in Petersburg, Alaska. That was my first role in radio, was building a station. And so it was the only news anybody had. So like, All Things Considered was like NBC Tonight, it was like the big thing.
Right.
Susan Stamberg was the, Oprah of
That's right.
the Times, because there was nothing else.
Yeah.
And so I started doing these little commentary on the invitation of a friend of mine who was the news director at our local station in Homer about just stuff around town, and I enjoyed it. It was just like a funny little thing to do. Occupied my Sunday evenings. I'd record it Sunday evening and he'd put it on the air. And then it was a statewide network, so they worked their way up to the Alaska statewide network, which was huge. I thought, well, I've peaked. This is it. I've had a good career. And I'm still building houses. And then Corey Flintoff, who is, now
Yes.
from NPR, he was the head of the Alaska, he was the host of the Alaska News Nightly. He said, you should send these things down to All Things Considered. I think that, they might do it. And that was back, if you were listening to ATC back then, remember they had Bailey White and they had
Yes.
that woman, I forget her name, from Missoula, Montana. And they had these voices from kind of out in the country. That's when that was going on. And that's when I sent the tapes down there. And they immediately aired the first one. I remember I was on the roof of a house right in downtown Homer, and this woman from the radio station roars up in her car and she says, Ted Clark, the executive producer of All Things Considered, is on the phone. He wants to know if he can use your piece. And of course, I think that my hammer is still laying on the roof of that house. I just And that was it. I mean, that afternoon, I'm sitting in Alaska, and I hear Susan Stamberg introduce me.
That's so fabulous.
Yeah.
What a great story.
And off it went, you know.
It's so great that it's still such a big story, because now, you know, there are so many people doing so many things and so many commentaries. But to be there at that time, you know, when things were still kind of new and fresh.
Right. It was way before everybody had a podcast.
Yeah,
right.
Way
before.
Which would be, I would love to talk to you about that. That could be a whole nother show. They're talking about podcasts and the power of podcasts.
I mean, we've been here in Vermont for 16 years now, almost 17. And if you'd have told me even 20 years ago that this is where I'd be living, I couldn't have figured out how that would happen.
Really?
I couldn't have seen it. We left Alaska to keep my family together. I have a son from a previous marriage who was going into high school. His mom moved from Alaska back down to the Seattle area. And Rita and I decided we'd move down for his high school years to keep the family together, because he was used to having mom and dad around.
Rita, your second wife.
Yes. So we came down to Seattle, and actually we live in Gig Harbor, a little town near there. And he went through school, and by the time he was graduating, we were thinking, you know, well, we're just going back to Alaska. I still had a home there. Rita became pregnant with our now 16-year-old son, Ben. And it's like, wow, going to Alaska's a long way from her family, we're all on the East Coast, still mostly are, from Maine all the way down to Florida. Ben was going to be the first grandchild on that side of the family, and they're very, very close, the Ramirezes. And there was just like no way we could take their grandbaby back to Alaska. And so in very quick fashion, we said, well, where could we live that would work for all of this? And I knew Brattleboro a little bit through my friend Will Ackerman, who's been here forever. And Will and I have friends going back to like the early 90s. And I used to come up here whenever I was on the East Coast. I used to try to make a side trip up to Brattleboro to see Will and look around. And so it was always, you know, interesting to me, but never a place I thought I could live. It's just like, oh yeah, it's neat. I can see why people like it. But it was like, but I am an Alaska guy. I live in Alaska. I never thought I would leave Alaska. It never even crossed my mind that I would leave Alaska. And so anyhow, we move out here. You do anything for love and family, right? I said, well, it checked all the boxes, right? You know, it's got good schools, it's got cool people, there's people who read poetry and use chainsaws. I mean, that's something I look for in a place. And so I thought, well, we'll do fine here. But I really never thought I'd have the friends I had back in Alaska, where I'd gone through it all. You know, it's 23 years on that, and going from a knucklehead, meathead logger, fisherman, construction worker, alcoholic, you know, hard drinking, hard living, this and that, and then getting married, having a baby, becoming a writer, being a radio guy. I had people who went through all that with me, right? So I thought that's never going to happen again. And then it did. And I've met the most wonderful people here, and I have the closest friends here as I've ever had. And that surprised me. I really thought that, well, I had a good run. That was great. And now I raise my family. But it's like I got this whole other life.
You end up on Wait at some point. You get the Motel 6 gig, and then
the Motel 6 gig. I had a couple commercial radio shows of my own that never really got up on step, but they were good. They were fun. End of the Road was one, kind of a Prairie Home Companion-ish kind of thing. Looking back on it, I was way too close to that for my comfort. I don't talk about it much. And then there was another one just called Bodett and Company, which was more of a studio version of that. And all of it always involved a fictional monologue of mine, which produced a number of books, which all sold fairly well. And it was, you know, I was doing okay, and the advertising was floating the boat when I wasn't doing okay with the writing. And, you know, that's what I was doing. And, you know, every couple of years I'd write another book about this or that. And then in 2005, I get a call from the producers of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and asked me if I want to be the Not My Job guest. You know, it's like the guest they have on each show. And and sure, I love it, and did that, and then it just rolled into, well,
Yes.
can you come out and sub for Carl Castle, who's going to be on vacation next week? And I think they did that to meet me, to see,
Yeah.
you know, because they're very good at bringing people in who are going to get along with the other people who they already have.
right.
I think that's one of the things that makes that show so good.
And you play off each other. That's
So
the other
well,
fabulous
yes,
thing
that
about
and that
it.
is it, and it's one of the things that makes it so fun. Is it's almost like my other friends, and there's a bunch of us now. There's probably 20, 25 panelists,
right.
and we never see each other all at the same time. You see each other two at a time. You know, like last week I was on with Maeve Higgins and Luke Burbank. I love both good friends, and I don't know if I've ever seen Luke and Maeve at the same time. And
Right.
and then a couple of years ago for the 20th anniversary show, they had us all come in. It was so much fun because we all know each other, and we'd never been in the same room together.
You'd all work together
Right,
too. So you
and they were trying to get us to cooperate and do this show and all that, and it was impossible. We were just terrible.
herding comics is worse than herding
It
cats,
was great.
right?
Somebody found a bag of bats and hard hats backstage somehow. So we all come out on stage with bats and hard
Oh,
hats.
God.
And the producers are like, what? Where did they find those? It was very funny.
That's very funny. So in the course of all of this, which is your life, you are getting notoriety at different stages and different levels. How has that been for you?
It's fine. I mean, it's good now. I wasn't good at first. I was very uncomfortable with it. Very uncomfortable. I didn't want to be the famous guy in Homer, Alaska, because I just wanted to be the guy there. But you can't do that. I mean, that just doesn't work. And I remember a real dear friend of mine there said, because I was complaining, like, God, I can't even go to the grocery store except like at 10 o'clock at night, because otherwise it's like, oh, Tom, I want you to meet my nephew, and would you sign this? And Tom, say we'll leave the light on for you. And I just got so tired of having the same conversation over and over. And he gave me a piece of advice, which I didn't take till years later. And he said, you got to do something else other than what you do. If people know you for something else, they'll talk to you about something else. So I said, you should join the fire department or do something like that. And so fast forward to some years later, we're moving to Brattleboro, Vermont, and Dummerston actually is where we live. And I said, this is a fresh start. This gives me a chance to start new. And I immediately set out to do other things. I got involved. After being here 16 months, I ran for the select board.
I know you were, and you were on the select board for about 7 years.
7 years, yeah. And that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever done. I mean, I loved everything about that, right up until when I didn't. But it was really, it was such a great way to come into a town.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And the fact that I was elected was just because I think the people of Dummerston just thought it might be funny, you know, to have this guy on the select board.
A little comic relief.
Something, yeah. And I also think that, you know how Vermonters are about, like, people from Connecticut, you know, Flatlanders, whatever. And there's like a hierarchy of disdain for depending on where you're from. And so they knew I was new, and they said, so where are you coming from? And if I say Alaska, there was like this moment where they're like, I don't have my mind made up about that. And there was a window I could fly through at that moment.
That's great.
And I think that's how I wheedled my way into it. But being on the select board was wonderful. I met so many people I probably would never have come across.
Yeah.
I had so many really genuinely meaningful experiences. Because you can help people when you're on something like the select board.
That's right.
You know, people call you with problems, and they're big and small, but you actually can do a little bit for a lot of them.
That's right. Well, it must have been such a discovery for you as well to realize that resource in yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the psychology of tithing, where even if you only have $1, if you give a dime to somebody, it's your way of saying to yourself that you have enough. And for me, it's always been time. I've never felt like I've had enough time. I don't have enough time to volunteer. I don't have enough time for that. So by giving that much time to the town, to somebody else, it was my way of saying I have enough.
Yes.
I have enough. And that changed my life right there. I've been a lot calmer. I do have enough time. I give plenty of my time away.
Yeah.
If I didn't have enough, I wouldn't be able to do that.
Right. Yeah, that's a very cool thing to come out of that.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And so from there, or during that time too, you started something called the Hatch.
Yes.
Yes.
And that was the accidental result of, it was myself, my wife Rita Ramirez, and our friend Elizabeth, and our friend Rich, Elizabeth Catlin, Rich Corson. All four of us were on like different boards. And we're having coffee about something else, and we're starting to break up, and I said something like, oh, I got to go over to the Richards Group and ask for some money for the Hockey Association. She says, no, you're not, because I'm going over there to ask them for the retreat. And, and it's just like, and then we said, well, who else are you asking? And we realized that we're all going to the same places over and over. And there's so many individuals and businesses in Brattleboro that are so generous.
Yes.
And so beleaguered.
Yep.
And they just get over and over. And we're all going back to the same well.
That's right.
And so we thought, how do we bring new money into this? We can't just keep, there's a limit, right? It's unsustainable. How do we bring new money? People who wouldn't normally give, who will give. How do we bring outside money in? And that's when we came up with the Hatch, which is, let's put on a really fun show with all these people we know from our day jobs. Rich Corson works in television. He knows like every comedian there is. I've got all my Wait friends and NPR people. And so we did. We invite them over to tell stories and tell jokes. And we charge top dollar for it, about as much as the market will bear, because it's all being passed through.
Right.
So people who might not write a check for $60 to Groundworks Collaborative will spend $60 on a ticket, knowing it's going to Groundworks Collaborative.
That's right.
And they'll come and laugh and have a good time.
And that was Storytellers on a Mission. That was yes.
Yeah.
It's such a great idea, and it works.
It worked. We've raised over $300,000 doing that, and I don't know how many shows, eight shows or so. Usually 25 to 30 grand is what we clear after expenses. We have a great time.
Everybody has a good
doing
time.
it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, and you can exhaust your friends too. I mean, you can only ask your talented friends so many times to come and do something.
And for you guys too, who are producing it, the production of it alone is exhausting, right? Just trying to get all these people together at the same time.
Right.
And it's also, this storytelling that's going on everywhere. And I think getting people, especially locally, because that's where it happens, to realize that they have their own stories.
Yeah.
And that this could be them on the stage, and that's happening. Peter Case is doing
Peter
Fables.
Case has picked up on that.
That's right.
Over at Next Stage. That's a terrific program.
Yep.
The storytelling thing is just everywhere now. I mean,
Yes,
I got involved with the Moth about 10 years ago, before the Hatch, and it's amazing if you've ever been to a Moth show, and you can experience a little bit at the Hatch too when we're being serious. Somebody telling you something true live. It's organic. It's in our natures to do that. And the fact that those shows are sweeping the nation, there's something like 80 storytelling venues in New York City right now. On different nights, like there's for medical doctors in Brooklyn, on Tuesday nights, there's this bar does it, and it's everywhere. And I think it's a reaction to our phones, our digital lives, that we use them, we're connected, but it's not the same. We miss this,
That's right.
looking at each other and talking.
And telling our stories,
Right.
And to have a place to tell our stories instead of telling the same stories over and over again to our friends.
And we're so human when we do that, because that is, until very recent centuries, that's the only way we communicated what our values were, what our taboos were, what our history, everything. And it's what led me to understand the importance of the woodworking I was doing, to tell you the truth. When Greg Goodman, who's my co-founder of the Hatch Space, which is a woodworking shop and school and member organization that we started last year, we talked about it for 2.5 years. It started off, we were just going to do a gallery about beautiful, all of the best woodworkers of Vermont in our area. We really needed a place like that, we both felt. And then we said, well, what if there was a place where you could actually see the woodworkers like working, making this stuff? Oh, that's kind of cool. Like Shackleton kind of does that up in Woodstock. That could work. And then, well, what if they could take a class and learn how to do some of the stuff and so it grew from there. And as we worked through it and what it was going to be, it came down to that making things is like storytelling. It is when we're fully human. There's a wonderful book by Richard Sennett called The Craftsman. It's like 4 or 5 years ago. And he talks all about this, the history of the craftsman, craftsperson, all through history. They're standing within society and where they've been and where they are now, and how we began as makers. There's the Latin phrase is homo faber, which is man is maker. That's, they think that we were making tools before we were speaking. So in ways, it even came before language, which is the other thing that we have that makes us distinctly human amongst all the critters. And when I read Sennett's book, I got it. I said, yes, that's when I'm at my absolute best. There's two things that I do in my life that suddenly I realize make me feel exactly the same way. When I'm telling a story and when I'm making something. That's when I'm fully alive.
Wow.
And
can you talk about that a little more, Tom? About that feeling that you have? When you're engaged like that, yes.
Well, we're all self-centered. We're all narcissistic to some degree. And so you're always self-editing, thinking what you ought to be doing maybe. You're in the other room half the time when you're here. And to be fully present is kind of rare. You know what I mean? It's like, I think we all experience that. Or we always got a part of our mind somewhere else, our attention. Your wife's talking to you, but you're reading the thing on the screen. All of that's happening all the time. And those moments when I'm fully absorbed, I'm not thinking about myself. I'm not thinking about anything except what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what my hands are doing. That, like, time stops, pain goes away, troubles evaporate, and that to me is that's the moment of Zen, as they say. And again, I feel it saved my life when that's also when I realized many years later, I've been sober for 27 years, that's what's kept me sober. And I didn't even realize it until I started Hatch Space.
Oh, really? That's recent.
That was my realization.
Oh, wow.
It's just like, of course. Because I know that drinking or doing anything else would only mess this up, that it can't give me this. And I want other people to feel that.
Yes, right.
And I think that it's in our natures, all of us, to make things. It might all be woodwork. That's what we're doing because that's what we know how to do. There's a lot of maker spaces around. There's one in Greenfield. There's one up in Rutland starting up. There's one up in Claremont. And they are multi-disciplines. And it's more of a, you come in there and you work on their tools and stuff. They don't do so much instruction, but to make the facility available. So we're more educational that way.
So Hatch Space is also offering workshops, and you have people on board there who can help other people coming in?
And then the idea is that then you become a member and you can come in during the open shop hours and just work. Just work on your own thing. And
you have access to the tools as well,
right? Well, and that's the thing. It's woodworking is an expensive sport. There's a lot that comes with it, and even people who do it a little bit don't have some of the big stuff that can really help. So we've got all the stuff, so that even if you're a professional, who if you're working out of a basement or a small garage and you need the great big planer or the big sander that you only need twice a year, so why own it? Well, then we hope to attract those people, and we are, to come down and be a part of our community, because then they're rubbing up against the others, and we all are learning from it.
It's amazing what you've done to bring people together in different ways. And there's, I know that you almost always work as a team, kind of, actually. Like, a lot of these things are team sports for you, right?
Well, they are. I think it's my way of counteracting my natural instinct, which is a bit of a hermit. On any given day, if I didn't have an appointment in town, I wouldn't just come to town. Maybe we're all like that, but I'm happiest alone sometimes, and I realize that I have no trouble being alone. I don't get lonely necessarily. I could be in my shop for days if nobody came and reminded me I had a family and obligations. So by having all of these associations that I'm involved with is what feeds me, because you need that. I mean,
it feeds you, but what I'm picking up from a lot of things that you're talking about, you're also sort of throwing down a gauntlet for yourself. Instead of retreating, or instead of doing something that you wouldn't normally do, you're kind of really putting yourself out there.
Yeah, don't you have to do that? And
a lot of people don't.
Well, I know. I mean, and I guess, like I'm 64 years old, and it's like, should I really be afraid of anything anymore, right? And like just standing here, I'm uncomfortable because I'm 64 years old, right? So why not get out of your comfort zone a little bit? Sure, it's easier to stay home, but what are you going to get out of it, You're going to end up into the kids' Honey Nut Cheerios again, but just like binge watching something.
Do you get nervous when you get up on stage or when you have to get in front of a microphone?
Well, I don't call it that. I get excited.
That's good.
And I used to get terribly stage frightened, and I was script addicted. Like I couldn't be out on, if I had to give a talk or a speech, I was reading it basically. I was not comfortable, and that's something that Wait did for me. Is the last 15 years that doing that, where you just go out and it's all improv.
Yes.
It got me over that fear that I was not going to have something to say.
Right, but you've got the resources to say something. That's another part of it.
I think we all do. I mean, we all do. We just don't think we do. For years, I didn't think. I know I couldn't do that. I couldn't. I would just be amazed that people could walk out with a mic and just start talking to an audience. And now that's like all I want to do.
Really?
Yeah. Like if there's announcements or something I have to read, if I'm like emceeing or something, it's just like, it's such a bother. It's just.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So it feeds you. So do you feel that it's a two-way street?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It definitely is.
Yeah. So you can see how people can do that and get fed from it and get addicted to it too, as well, I would think.
Yeah.
The other side of that.
Yeah. that Moth experience, when I did my first Moth, it was in Burlington at the Flynn Theaters, like 1,400 people, sold out. I was telling a very personal story about an accident I had, which prompted my father, who he and I had a difficult relationship, but he did something very meaningful during that time in my life, and I was telling that story, and he had only died like 5 months previous. It was all very raw. It was very emotional. I didn't think I was going to be able to get through it. And as I stopped to like get the emotion out of my throat or something, I could feel that audience was just there. Like I could have left for 5 minutes and they would have waited, and that they were just there.
Yeah.
I'd never experienced that. If you ever performed on stage, you feel the audience as a singular thing. It isn't a group of people. It isn't people. It's a group. It's a singular beast, if you will. So, sometimes friendly, sometimes not. And you feel them. You feel them just like I feel you sitting crossing. See how you're reacting to what I'm saying, and you feel that with an audience. And I've been on a lot of stages doing a lot of fun things. I'd never felt an audience so with me as that.
That's amazing. That must be an amazing feeling.
And I just wanted that again and again. And the people who do the Moth a lot, I have a lot of friends, Peter Guerrero and Adam Wade and that, they're like the Moth rock stars.
Yes.
And they talk about the same thing. That's the drug.
Well,
that's the drug.
When I was thinking of doing the intro for you and stuff, I realized that, you have done a lot of connecting in our community. And I think that that's part of what you're talking about as well. The more people you bring in to whatever the endeavor is, the more connective tissue you're going to have. And that it's an organic process, right?
Yeah. And true to my friend Gary, who told me, do something else and people will have something else to talk to you about, That's what's happened.
That's
I see people, I can't walk 20 feet down the street without having another
That's
conversation with somebody. And it's about almost everything except myself.
Right, it could be gravel pits, right? It could
It's
be
all of that, and I don't have to have that same conversation over and over.
That's
About,
so great.
so how'd you get going in Motel 6? Which is like, you can only have that so many times in your life,
That's
and then
right.
you're done, right?
That's so cool. Tom, this is really fun.
Oh, this is great. When are you going to make an hour version of
I
it,
know,
right?
I know.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we have thought of that, but half an hour keeps things pretty tight.
It does.
And you get to sort of condense everything. So, thank you so much for coming on. And
Oh, thanks for having me. This
Yeah.
is great. I do go on and on, but
No.
thank you for.
It's your job, right? You
Right.
get paid to do that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful life.
Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks to all of you for joining us today for this fun show. We're so glad that Tom was able to take some time and be with us from his busy schedule. And just to let you folks know that the Hatch Space is having an ongoing show at the gallery at the Latches. That's up now, and you can stop by and see it there. Also, at the end, we will have, for more information, we will give you the site for the Hatch Space. So again, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.